Okay, good afternoon and welcome to another episode of the Chicago State University Gardner Institute video series, during which we are highlighting the experiences of Chicago State faculty members who attended a training this summer, which focused on high impact online teaching practices. And with us this afternoon is Dr. Molly McDonough. And Dr. McDonough, we're so happy to have you here. Could you share a little bit with our audience about your experience working at Chicago State?
Yeah, thanks so much for interviewing me and for the opportunity to share my experience in the high impact online training. So I am a faculty member in the Department of Biology at Chicago State, and I teach classes like zoology, evolution, genetics, and bioinformatics. And I also teach intro biology courses for the non-majors.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. And I believe you said this is your third year at Chicago State.
It is. It
Yes.
is. Um, what is it? My fifth semester teaching.
All right, good. And you were one of the lucky ones because, as I've shared, I just was captivated by the excitement and enthusiasm of colleagues who attended this Gardner Institute training this past summer. Can you tell us a little bit about why you even attended that training to begin with?
Yeah. I when I made the transition to online, the online environment, we all had to make that pivot
Mm-hmm.
when the pandemic hit and we moved everything to online. I really struggled, and there were a couple of things that happened during the end of last spring semester that I realized I really need help, and I really need a community of people that are going through the same thing in order to learn what the best practices are. So when I saw the title of it, that's what really got me. But I think some of the major things that happened to me were just relying on the LMS so heavily. If something goes wrong, one time something did go wrong, and I was administering an exam when they were working on the LMS, and so it shut everything down, and it resulted in a lot of stress for the students, but
Sure.
also they didn't trust me after that, and so I wanted to create a environment where they would trust me, even if something did happen, that we would have a backup plan, and that I would not so much rely on summative assessments because traditionally this class that I was working on, revamping in the online best practices course, I really wanted to shift that course completely to where it wasn't relying on summative assessments the entire time, that I would start adding in formative assessments and start adding in active learning. And so I figured this is a good chance for me not only to learn best online practices, but just best teaching practices in general. And
Mm-hmm.
so I knew it was like a chance for me to like immerse myself for a couple of weeks in a class like that.
All right, good, good. So did you find that sense of community as well as the research-based practices that make a difference?
It did. And I think, having that daily communication with people that were going through the same thing was super helpful. And I also, one of the things that's really challenging in biology and some of the other STEM fields is that we have laboratories that we're used to doing with the students in person. And
Mm-hmm.
so, how can I convert those laboratories into an online experience where they're still kind of getting the same thing?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you really can't do it. It's really hard. So zoology, this course that I'm teaching right now, that I was redesigning, most of the activities we would traditionally do were dissections. And so you don't want to send students home with formalin fixed specimens. And so what could I do? What could I replace that with to where they're getting the same thing? So one of the major things that I started with from the online course was the backward design. So starting from, okay, what do I want the students to learn this semester? okay, now that I know what those goals are, what do I need? What can I do in the classroom or in the online environment to get them there? And then how am I going to assess that, given that it's an online environment? And so that really helped me like just take the time to process that and then to get the feedback from other people who have more experience than me designing online courses.
So yeah, to feedback, which we so rarely get ourselves, except maybe on a student evaluation at the end of a course. And so for people who may not be familiar with that concept of backward design, can you explain a little bit more about it? You talked about identifying your end goals.
Yeah, and so for this particular class, um, I was working with a course that was not designed by me. So there were previous instructors for this course and a syllabus that I was working with. And there were learning objectives on it. And so I actually started from the very beginning and said, okay, what are the student learning objectives that I want from this course, given that we're also in this online learning environment? So I added in a few learning objectives that I felt were appropriate, like working in groups and analyzing data and that sort of thing, things that weren't in the syllabus previously.
Mhm.
So you really start with what you want the students to take away from the course after by the end of the semester. And then you design the course based on that. And I hadn't previously approached a course like that. I was like,
Mhm.
okay, we'll start from, lecture one.
Right. Chapter
And so,
one, chapter two.
mhm. So it was really neat to do that. And now I'm starting to do that with other courses as well.
Cool. And so obviously, if you're expanding to other courses, you felt that it really did make a difference for you this semester and doing it that way.
Oh yeah, it was really impactful.
Cool. Any other big takeaways before we get to some of the specifics in your class? Any other takeaways from the training itself?
Yeah, I really took some time to reflect on um, the CSU students and to really understand maybe what their experiences were like. And one of the things that we would read about and discuss in the high impact class is empathy and to really how can we um, create a really positive learning environment for our students given the stresses that they're under. And I had reflected on that, but this really was a chance for me to think about it and to discuss that with other faculty. And they even brought in some guest speakers to talk about that. And I think that was really important for me as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they made that a priority in terms of incorporating any of these new practices. Very good.
That's right.
Very good. So what are some of the specifics that you're going to share with us today? What are the things, is it one or two specific practices that you're going to be focusing on?
Yeah, I'm going to show you um, my um, Moodle site for this course. Um, and I'm going to show you just kind of what a typical week looks like. One of the things that I did was at the beginning of the course, I did a survey with the students to really understand what their needs were and kind of what their internet, if they had internet issues, if they
Ah,
had computer issues,
mhm.
if they were, if they had kids of their own that they were teaching at home, if um, if if there was a desire to do any uh, asynchronous classes versus synchronous portions. And overwhelmingly, the feedback I got was that they preferred to have at least some portion of the class be asynchronous. And so I'm going to show you kind of what that looks like. And then I'm also going to show you the major class project that we did. So I told you how I wanted to incorporate more formative assessments in this course, which
Hmm.
was typically a class for which we did a bunch of unit exams, and we would have chapter quizzes, and then we would do practicals based on the specimens examined in labs. And so all of it was pretty much exam based
Hmm.
assessments. So
Hmm.
I wanted to make the switch to doing this group project that we would do together as a whole, but also divided it up into these small groups for which we would do breakout rooms, and and then they would have an individual portion too. And so I'll show you what that project is.
Great. Sounds good.
All right, so sorry, I'm gonna screen share. Okay, so here's what my page looks like. What I did was I created, before week 0, I created just a little kind of portion where this is what I presented to them before the class started. So anyone that was eager to get on Moodle early, I just had a fun video for them to watch about a bird watcher in Central Park, just to get them excited about urban animals. And then the textbook, and then the syllabus, and then a statement from the abilities office, and then some links to get free versions of office type stuff. And then in week 0, I address the computer needs. So I have a statement that links them to where they can go to for getting a computer or internet if that's what they need. And then I also have a PDF of when this class did have face-to-face meetings, and so the protocol proposed by CSU that we would follow. I also kind of have a statement about my commitment to the class, um, and my commitment to safety, so that I could just start establishing trust before the class even started.
And can
Um,
I ask you, are those elements new since Gardner, or did you do that before?
no, I've never done a week 0. I've never even had. I would just present the syllabus on the first day,
Hmm.
and so this was really helpful because I feel like many students didn't even know, okay, am I supposed to go to CSU the first day of class or not?
Right.
So just sending the emails early, and where to look for information early, so that they would know, okay, Moodle's where you're going to find everything. Go to the LMS. And I thought that was really helpful, and that was all new. All of that was
Hmm.
new. And then a typical week would look like this, where I would have a giant red statement early on that's like, okay, we're not going to be on campus. Don't come to campus. And then tell them what we're going to do instead. And
Yes.
so, we would have a meeting, usually, and actually, let me show you what it really looks like. Let me get you to now.
Just
Um,
as you're scrolling down, I can see already, even in your week 0 material there, that you really were, especially if you hadn't done it before, you really were thinking from the perspective of a student. You know, what would they
oh
need to
yeah.
have? Where could they get some free access to those tools? And where do they go? That really is fantastic, especially for our students that are in remote that never wanted to be in remote, right? They never signed on for an online experience. So that seems really, really, really helpful.
Yeah, so what I would do is, here we're down at week 11, for example,
Hmm.
and I would tell them where the material is coming from. So I still use a textbook for this class. And so I would tell them, all right, chapter 21, we're reading about hexapods, which are like, they include the insects. And then, here they had an assignment that was due. Part of their introduction for the project was due. And so a link to that. But I would have on, this class meets twice a week for 3 hours each. And so the first part of the week, I would have virtual office hours.
Hmm.
At the same time, there is a lecture that I made on Screencast-O-Matic. So I would have myself lecturing, but I would have like the textbook slides and additional supplementary slides. And I didn't present them with, for this class, I do not present them with the PowerPoint lecture slides. I make them go through the lecture and make their own notes. And that's
Mm-hmm.
like huge for this class because it's a lot of memorization.
Mm.
And so what their responsibility is on Monday is rather than meeting, that they're supposed to go through the lecture material, they're supposed to complete a quiz over that lecture material, and then they meet with me when they run into problems. So I'm sitting in Big Blue Button, and they come in and out with particular problems that they have. Then when we meet on Wednesday, that is always synchronous. And so for 3 hours, we work on an activity. And for this particular week, there was an arthropod activity. For that, what I would do is I give them the activity. And in Big Blue Button, I usually present a couple PowerPoint slides for some announcements, and then I give them the objective for this activity, and then I immediately put them into breakout rooms. And for every activity, I pretty much did breakout rooms. And this was really nice because this class has 25 students.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could put them into groups of 5 or so. And then I can go in and talk to them in these smaller groups. And that's where I learn the most from them is if whenever I would do stuff that was all 25 at a time, I found that very often they tune out, the activity level drops, sometimes they just disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And very often in this class, they do not want to use their video. And I don't require them to use their video because sometimes they just do not have stable enough internet to use video and audio.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the breakout room is when I really start chatting with them and getting to know them and making sure, like, okay, everybody in the group is engaging. If they're not engaging, pull them aside into a different breakout room and they just explain what's going on. Some people are teaching their student or their own kids. Some people, I mean, have had all sorts of reasons why they can't participate. Many of them are perfectly valid reasons why they can't
Mm-hmm.
participate. And so I just let them know, like, I see them, I hear them, address any problems I can. They know that their participation points drop, so it's advantageous for them to participate. But they also know that there's other ways to get points in the class. You know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it works, and every week it's just the same thing. I tried to create a pattern up front that was
Mm-hmm.
predictable, so that they knew. I tried to make it to where I always put when something was due up front, so that when they go to Moodle, they know they just know by the title. Okay, it's due on this day at this time. And very often for the quizzes, I tell them what it's like. Okay, this one only has 5 questions. I'm going to give you 10 minutes, but you can't move backwards. You can only move forwards on these questions.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they're multiple choice, short answer, that sort of thing. And I tell them I only give you a little bit of time for these quizzes because you have to prepare ahead of time. You have to study, you have to go through the lecture, and then you're ready to go for the quiz. And they know if they're not prepared, they're not going to do very well on the quiz. But there's other ways of assessment. So if they don't do well on the quizzes, I have a project that I'm doing with them. So this was worth 25% of their grade, and it was pretty fun. And I don't know if I'm going to do it again, but um, what it is a site called iNaturalist, and it's an application that's now supported by a couple of different organizations. But it started with a group of master's students from University in California, and it's turned into a citizen science project where if you go to the beginning of it, you use your phone to make observations of plants and animals, and then the citizen science community or the curators on this help you identify what that plant or animal is. And right now they have like more than 45 million observations, and you can see all these red dots are where their observations are from.
Wow.
And so our class, CSU Zoology, set up a project where for 2 months we tried to collect as many observations as we could on the animals in the Chicagoland region.
Wow.
And
You could set this up right on their website, iNaturalist?
yes, and you set it up as a project, and you have like a beginning and an end time. And so ours just went from August 26th to November 11th.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty much everyone in the class participated in this, and it wasn't supposed to be competitive, but the way iNaturalist sets these projects up, it turns out to be kind of competitive. And there were some students in the class that got kind of competitive about it, but in general, it was just exploratory for them to, and so you can see here are the various species that we documented. A lot of birds, a lot of insects. That's the most diverse animal group, are the insects. And so they got to understand that, like, okay, this is where the animal diversity is. We have incredible bird diversity in Chicago. Many of the students didn't even realize this, that we have some sites in Chicago that are like nationally recognized bird sites. And so they actually went to these sites and made observations. And that was really nice because they could go individually. They didn't have to worry, about social distancing. They would just go on their own to some of these sites. Each group, so they worked in groups, and each group had a hypothesis that they were testing. And so they developed their hypothesis up front. Some students were interested in animal diversity in urban areas like the city of Chicago compared to suburban areas. Some students were interested in just activity patterns of certain animals. So as it got colder, we would see less insects or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're at this stage where they're submitting their final report, and they were able to download data from iNaturalist to supplement the data that they collected, and download it as like an Excel sheet that they could do some basic statistics on. And it was really cool. Like, I didn't expect that it would go that smoothly, but they surprised me. They did really well.
So they worked in teams on this project, and can you
Yep.
give us an example of one of their hypotheses? And then what kind of analysis do they do? What are the components of the project?
Yeah. So I think can I pull up a student's project that I think is really good? Okay. So this particular group, their group name, I think, was Animal Busters. So the groups came up with different names. Um, and so their hypothesis was that they would have more animal observations in um, a uh, suburban area versus a highly urban area.
Mhm.
And so they were looking at kind of the lakeshore area of Chicago. I'll just show you the map. This area here versus an area called the North Branch Trail, which is, you can see Evanston up here, which is so north of the city. And so this is an area that's more wooded, maybe less impacted by urbanization, right? But one of the things that they didn't consider with the Chicago Lakefront Trail, because they set this hypothesis up ahead of time, is that we have this huge waterfront and we get a lot
Mhm.
of migratory birds. And so here you can see all of the data they collected. These were their data points.
Mm.
And they ended up, they were looking at um, all species of animals. And so this could include fish, birds, insects, etc. And then they calculated a basic diversity index called the Shannon-Weiner Diversity Index. And the higher that number is, the more diverse the area is. And so then they had to decide how to filter their data. And so they wanted to make it somewhat manageable. And so they selected just a certain time frame. And I
Mm.
think they did theirs over the time frame that we used for the class. So
Mhm.
that August 26th through November 11th. So they standardized it that way. And you can see that the Chicago Lakefront Trail has a higher Shannon-Weiner index
Mhm.
than the suburban area. So they were like, oh, wow, there's a more diverse animal community on the lakefront, which is highly urban. So then in their discussion, they sort of discuss why that is, and they consider the size of the plots that they were looking at. The Lakefront Trail had more observations in general. They also considered things like, well, there's more people, like maybe more tourism, and more people using the iNaturalist app just right in the Chicago area.
Hmm.
And then just that we have this lake front in general that attracts a lot of species. So it
Very
was
cool.
really cool. They kind of ran the whole gamut of like what it is to do science.
Sure. And made it real in terms of their own environment. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, what a memorable takeaway from your course to
Yes.
have an experience like that. So beautiful. And as you said, you added an objective for this kind of group work. What are your observations about how the group work worked? And then how would you describe their experience, whether they liked it or not, and whether they got a lot out of it?
Yeah, so I plan to do a final assessment where I'm I'm asking them to take a survey at the end of the course um, where they describe their group experience. Because what I found was, well, you have some very strong natural leaders that like to do the bulk of the work, that they have some uh, and others that maybe see it as an opportunity, like how somebody else will do it. I don't have to do it.
Mm,
What I tried to do for each of the activities was rotate the quote unquote group leader.
hmm
So everyone had to be a group leader for at least one of the activities, if not two. And so for this final project, you could see that some of these natural leaders really push the projects to completion in the end. I hope that that helped the students that maybe didn't know how to approach a project like this, didn't know how to analyze. We had a day where we analyzed data together, and so I gave them some examples on how to do things, and maybe they just didn't feel so comfortable. But in their group setting, maybe that worked as like a training opportunity for some
hmm
of those students, where if you have these natural leaders, they can work to help everyone in the group. So I'm still a little, I need to redo how I evaluate these group environments. So I learned a lot about what's actually happening in a group just by popping into these breakout rooms.
hmm
And so next semester, what I want to do is revise it a bit to where I have a rubric that they see ahead of time. Okay, this is how I'm going to evaluate your group work.
hmm
And so that is something that can be, another summative assessment is how they're behaving with this group dynamic.
Sure, sure. And how did they like the experience?
Well, I I will find out in the class evaluation. Um, I tried to do some polling because I felt like um, I I was really unsure if they were liking the online approach
hmm
versus do they really miss this face-to-face stuff, or is how we're doing it working?
Right.
And so I had a poll where I asked them directly, and some of them really do miss the face-to-face environment. And many of the
Sure.
students say that that's how they learn. They need to be in the classroom to learn. But I had just as many students, if not more, say that they prefer the online environment because it allows them to go at their own pace and
hmm
gives them a little flexibility during their week because they have so much other stuff going on in
hmm
terms of maybe some of them are essential workers or teaching their own kids.
Right.
So I feel like it's both extremes. Some really like it and maybe prefer it, and some students really do miss coming in. But how I feel like engagement was pretty good when we would do the synchronous meetings,
hmm
such that I hope that they got to they got to interact with students as much as they would in a face-to-face setting, or they would get to interact with me as much as they would in a face-to-face setting.
Yeah, and it certainly looks like you have built that into the structure of each week for sure. What did you notice? Did you notice anything different about the quality of the work that they've been turning in all semester? Any difference?
I feel like that might be true because think providing them these asynchronous lectures for which they would look at those and then they would take a quiz, um, set them up for success when we did the activity. So if they did all that material ahead of time, then they would be much better suited to come in and do the activity that week on a
Mhm.
Wednesday.
Mhm.
Um, in previous semesters, I was never really prepared enough to give them a bunch of content, the week before, and um, expect that they would be able to come in and do an activity instead of a lecture. I
Mhm.
really like doing the asynchronous lectures, and I think I want to carry that on because we can do so many more activities if they get the reading and the content done ahead of time. We can get into some really fun stuff. And
Mhm.
so I think that's one of the things that I noticed this semester is that if I can give them stuff, if I deliver it in the right way, I can give them a lot of content that they'll look at,
Yeah.
and give them some hard predictable deadlines that they'll follow. Sometimes they get behind, um, but they know where the material is and they can always go back to it.
Mhm. Wow. Well, you have really shared such a powerful kind of restructuring of your approach here, and I really love the way you surveyed the students at the beginning to really get a good sense of what they were working with, so that you could kind of build that into your consideration. The rhythm of these weeks seems really great. The front loading of the content, as you say, the weekly activities in the small groups, and then the major projects. So it sounds like a class I would love to take. And
Unfortunately, we're kind of phasing this one out.
oh gosh, but yeah, I'm sure you'll be very interested to see their evaluations. And as we kind of wind down here, we've got about a minute or two left. Um, any advice or any tips that you might have for colleagues that want to dip their toe into the water, or want to get a little bit more conversant with high impact practices for online teaching? Any advice that you might have for a colleague or two?
I think finding a community, even if it's a small community of people that want to make the change together, is really helpful.
Hmm.
Just seeing what other people are doing and having resources. I know we put a lot of our material on that Slack website,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a resource we can go back to and share with other people if they're looking for ideas. Really, I just kind of needed a model. I needed like something that I could follow, and what I came up with here, it was just stuff that was presented to me as good options in the high impact class. And so I think finding a community of people that have been successful at it, to ask questions, it, I think is the most helpful thing.
Yeah, and thank you to you and your colleagues for creating that Slack resource. We're going to make sure that anybody viewing these videos will have the instructions on how to access that. And thank you for actually playing your part in providing a model for other people, because your experience sounds terrific, and it's been great to hear your thinking, your rationale, even hearing some of the tweaks that you're going to be making going forward. Really appreciate your time and your sharing with this video series. I can't thank you enough.
My pleasure.